Firstly, I would like to extend my sympathies to the good people of Australia, the fruits of Australia, who appreciate the monarchy and have turned out in their tens of thousands to greet them and welcome them to their shores, either physically or spiritually. I would like to extend my sympathies for them having to endure this vulgar, grotesque display from, what was her name? Lydia Thorpe. Oh, excuse me, Lidia. Lydia Thorpe. Slip of the tongue. Sylvia Smith, thank you for your question or comment. I'd be interested to learn the biography of Lydia Thorpe. She has a very English name but claims to be pure Aboriginal and screamed at King Charles to give Australia back to the Aboriginal people. She screamed that he stole it from them, also screaming, "You are not my king." If she was up to date with the facts, she would know that King Charles has declared that Australia or any other member of the Commonwealth can leave if they want. Yes, they are free to go. He doesn't want any unhappy people in the Commonwealth. They are not prisoners. There are lots of small countries clamouring to be taken under Britain's wing. There are lots of perks to joining the Commonwealth. These protesters are slightly unbalanced. Thank you, Sylvia Smith. Well, firstly, I must clarify that the Commonwealth issue is separate from the issue of the constitutional monarchy. The Commonwealth is a voluntary association of 56 independent countries, but the protest is an objection to a British king as sovereign and the concept of a constitutional monarchy, so we mustn't conflate the two. As I'm sure most of you are aware, this chlamydia character accused the king of being a genocidalist, amongst other things. My impression of the gal is that she's Meghan on stilts. She is Meghan Markle on stilts. I'd never heard of the gal. I'll be quite honest with you, I was ignorant about her heritage. I still don't know that much about it, but what I do know is that she descends from English-Irish ancestry, whether or not she admits to that, and Aboriginal ancestry as well. Victorian Aboriginal, if you will, although of course the Aborigines came before Victoria. Her mother Marjorie was a passionate member of the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation, and her grandmother Alma is an activist too. She's from an activist family, and her grandma co-founded the Victoria Aboriginal Health Service with her mother Edna. So it goes back generations, but I do not believe that this vulgarity goes back generations, so that's no kind of excuse. But we cannot say that she is merely a poser or only a poser. I cannot accuse her of cosplaying in the vein of Ngozi Fulani or someone of that ilk, posturing in the style of recent bandwagoners to a certain extent. But in other ways I can accuse her of some of those things, because her father, Roy Illingworth, her father, went on record last year in the style of Thomas Markle Sr. Actually, it was very Tom Sr. Last year in a televised interview, shedding light from his perspective on this woman. They are semi-estranged. They keep in contact for birthdays, Christmases. He loves her. He says they love each other, but he doesn't trust her. He doesn't trust her. He says that she is raising her children to hate their country. She doesn't acknowledge her white siblings, apparently. They don't cut the mustard. He says she was cruel to him, and he also describes her as a very racist person. Yes, her own father. What does that tell you? You question her mental facility, Sylvia Smith. Well, so did the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Some time ago he suggested that there were health issues and that she needed to seek help. And this was in the wake of her outbursts outside a Melbourne strip club, where she referred to the clientele as white. I will not use that particular word, but the Cockney rhyming slang for the word is the Berkshire Hunt, and that is where the word Burke comes from. She called them that, white Burkes. The more profane version of that, she specified their colour and attacked the size of their genitalia. Albanese said at the time, "These are not the actions of anyone who should be participating in society in a normal way, let alone a senator." And incidentally, I'm told that the organisers of the ceremony that was taking place when she interrupted proceedings, they had been told and they were aware that she was trouble, and everybody else there knew exactly what she was like, and there had been gentle warnings, but she had been invited out of grace and civility and courtesy. Do you see? Do you see the way of royalty? It's called civility. And she threw that civility back in their face, but it's backfired. Backfired. Her personal life has been littered with drama after drama, from what I can tell, and she's been flushed with the glow, the afterglow of adrenaline for triumphing and showing the dusty old white king how it's done. You realise, don't you, that the last thing that she actually wants is what she claims to want, because this gives her the petty crumbs of the kudos that she craves amongst her fellow activists and wokies. She is a serial activist. And activism is very important, but if it comes from a place of genuine authenticity. She was declared bankrupt 11 years ago to the tune of $700,000 in debt, some of which was owed to Indigenous Business Australia. For legal reasons, this is according to Wikipedia. But it sounds, from everything that I hear, that her life is a bit of a car crash, and she brings vulgarity and calamity to every occasion, not just to her activism. Now, before I started hearing bits of information about this character, I wanted to sit back and ask myself whether or not one could approve of such a course of action that she took. And I thought then, and I think now, that I would like to place my ignorance and put that aside for one moment and ask my Indigenous viewers, any viewers who are Aborigine or of Aboriginal heritage, of which there are plenty, by the way, because they've actually been some of my most informed and gracious viewers throughout the 3 years of this channel. I've spoken to many of them over the years in the comment section, and I find their words invaluable, so I'm most interested to hear your views on this, my dear. But on the one hand, we have a non-violent protest. I mean, I suppose you could call the word she used an act of violence, and that is true, but it was restrained in the physical sense of violence, you understand. And on the one hand, that peaceful, if you will, type of protest is important. It is an important function within a democracy. So I do consider that, and I do consider the possibility of an artistic expression as a statement, as a form of protest, which sometimes has to involve elements of the graphic and elements of the vulgar. Sometimes it is required to make a point, but I do tend to agree with the elders. The elders of the Aboriginal community often go by Auntie and Uncle, which is very sweet, I think, and Auntie Violet Sheridan, our dear Aunt Vi, who had welcomed the King and Queen, said that she thought that chlamydia had been very disrespectful and does not speak for me. This was not only a slight on their majesties, by the way, but it was actually extremely embarrassing for the gracious friends and hosts of the King and Queen and the elders of that community. Highly embarrassing. Showing up with the intention of putting a stain on a respectful ceremony. There are life enhancers in this world, and there are energy vampires, and I'm sure you can deduce for yourself which category she falls into. The king was totally unruffled, my dear. Brushed it off the shoulder, it was nothing. Today's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. That's a saying here in the kingdom. In the olden days, they used to serve our fish and chips in actual newspaper with the print and the ink. My grandmother tells me that it was even more delicious coming straight from the pages of the newspaper, but that's where the saying emerged from. Today it's the headlines and it's all over the world. Tomorrow it'll be a fish and chip paper, my dear. And no one will pay any mind to it. And the king knows that. It was a beautiful ceremony, and the king gave an address at Parliament House, and it is my understanding that there was a collective groan when she began banging on in her usual vulgar, obscene way. A collective groan, a lot of eye-rolling, and here she goes again, here she goes again. But from a more personal angle, I've got to ask you in all sincerity, where does anybody get off shouting obscenities at a 75-year-old and his 77-year-old consort, one of whom has just travelled halfway across the globe while they're undergoing cancer treatment, serious cancer treatment, and barely past grieving their own mother anyway. This is a man who is in that role by accident of birth, through no fault of his own, and he gets on offering tireless work towards good relations between communities, fostering understanding and unity. That is what he's dedicated his whole life to. So I can understand if she's got her angers against the institution or historical colonialism, whatever it is, my dear, but not personally against the king. But the king's nonplussed reaction, if you can call it a reaction, to her ranting and raving did her no favours whatsoever. It actually had the reverse effect of that which she might desire. She has found her modus operandi for validation from her followers. She gets that little flush of triumph and pride and supply, because I intuit a sort of narcissistic bent to her nature from what I can see. And she's become careerist in this style. In 2021, she gave a speech to Parliament criticising their new bail laws that had been introduced to the Northern Territory. Well, she made the assumption, the erroneous assumption, that the Attorney General bringing in those new laws was a white male. And she criticised everything about it. Wrong! Wrong, chlamydia! Selina Yubo was actually an Aboriginal woman, not a white male. Didn't you get the memo, my dear? And there's been a litany of inappropriate comments wherever she goes, by the looks of it. Attention seeker. And other senators have had some harsh words for her. Senator Rafe Babette, actually, in my world, Ralphs are known as Rafe, but I will assume that in Australia perhaps it's Ralph. Ralph Babette, who is Mauritius-born, said to show such utter disrespect to King Charles, who has travelled to Australia despite ongoing cancer treatment, is disgusting. Eric Abbott, who is the former Tasmanian senator, said the senator would love to make herself a martyr on the back of her bad behaviour, and I personally would deny her that pleasure. Well, in my opinion, she should be deprived of her senator role, because in 2022, when she was sworn in, she was made to repeat the oath of allegiance, at that time to Queen Elizabeth, who she described as a coloniser. And at the time she made the oath, she gestured whatever the Black Power gesture is with her fist. And she was told to do it again, to do it properly, to make a proper oath of allegiance, which she sort of half-heartedly did, but then she continued to mock it online on her own social medias. Lydia Thorpe wouldn't even exist without the colonising ancestors of her white daddy. The Australian said that Lydia Thorpe is a one-trick pony who craves shameless publicity over substance while pocketing a taxpayer-funded salary of almost $260,000, working in an institution she claims to rage against. And in the words of Auntie Violet Sheridan, we are all so disappointed by it. He is our king, our sovereign, and he has got cancer. Hopefully people can see it for what it is. A one-off idiot. Oh, we love you, Aunt Vi, don't we? Auntie Violet Sheridan has got it down pat. A one-off idiot. Auntie Violet is a queen. That is a queen. That is the royal spirit. Not Chlamydia Thorpe. Chlamydia Thorpe is a court clown. A court jester paid to pester. But that was just a fly in the ointment, and the cream of Australia and their majesties continued to have an absolutely splendid time. There was the smoking ceremony, which was very successful, with plenty of goodwill and lots of love and even a hug or two. And there was sausage sizzling, served by large sausagey fingers at a barbecue in the park. And Queen Camilla was inducted to the Order of the Teaspoon, serving posh nosh to vulnerable customers, and His Majesty toured a construction site, and the younger generations were enthralled to their majesties and their sovereign. I did worry a bit seeing them having to navigate so many steps at the Sydney Opera House, so many, my dear. But there was Joanna Lumley to greet them at the bottom of the steps, who had been performing there by coincidence. You know, she's very good chums with the King and Queen as Dame Jo. And their majesties were looking very cool, actually, in their sunnies, weren't they? Very chic and very cool. And although social media and the online world can be harmful and cruel and destructive, I've got to say that it also brings great awareness to the royal family and their work and what they do.
We just shook the King's hand, which is wild.
And it was so amazing.
Everything from the major websites to little corners of the internet, like my own platform here, we bring awareness, and hundreds of thousands and millions get to know what the royals do and why they are worth their salt and worth their money. So it can work in their favour. I had a comment the other day from a basketeer in Canada who said that she had met youngsters who didn't even know why there was an image of the Queen on their banknotes. They didn't even realise that she was their former head of state before Charles. No idea. And there are those out there, and there are even those who have told me that they had no idea that the King was head of state of many other realms, or King of Australia, or King of Canada. Yes, my dear, yes. Big stuff. Big stuff. Lots of power, even if it is only soft. And some of us think that soft power is just as powerful.
We love our king, yes, we love our king, and we love Queen Camilla, and this is why we're here.
So all of this that you see, including the headlines that are furnished by the likes of Lydia Thorpe, including that, which splashed the Australian tour all over the newspapers when the death of Liam Payne had been distracting from the good news of the royal tour. Splashed all over the papers. You might think it's to the royal family's detriment, but actually no, it only helps to make them flourish and inform the younger generations coming through.
Very excited. I've been practicing my curves.
They've been walking about all over the place, pressing 1,000,000 palms, haven't they? 1,000,000 palms, shaking 1,000,000 hands. All those germs, just the thought of all those ungloved handshakes gives me the EBGBs, my dear. My worst nightmare. My worst nightmare.
Oh my god, I'm never washing this hand ever again.
But Queen Camilla presented literary awards to students and participants of the Queen's Commonwealth Essay Competition, which is the world's oldest international writing competition for schools. It's been going since 1883, and King Charles met cancer survivors at a melanoma clinic, and the Australian version of the King's Foundation was launched at a special reception at Admiralty House, and a tree was planted at the Botanic Gardens. I noticed that Tina Brown, who is the former editor of Vanity Fair and writer that many of you know, took part in the Ankler podcast with Janice Min. And she was talking about the Sussexes, and she said that the trouble with Meghan is that she has the worst judgment of anyone in the entire world. She's flawless about getting it all wrong. All of her ideas are total crap, unfortunately. And she described Harry as lamb to the slaughter in this situation, and he just sort of blindly followed her like a child, really. Well, the Sussexes might have noticed over the past few days that they do not have the unique ability to draw crowds in Australia, as they thought they were such rock stars. They thought they were Michael Jackson and Madonna, didn't they? Meghan thought that she was Michael Jackson, and Harry thought that he was Madge. Wake up call, you ain't, you're more like the cheeky girls. There were thousands all over Sydney. In fact, the police said that they had underestimated how many would turn up, and 3 or 4 times the amount of crowd rocked up to see their majesties, which isn't hugely advertised all over the place, by the way. They came because they wanted to see the King and Queen, and they loved the King and Queen, and they kept screaming at the King and Queen, "We love you, we love you, we love you." It's wonderful. There has been a big show of staunch monarchists, proud monarchists, from all generations, showing deep respect in this convivial atmosphere. But that sort of adulation went to the Sussexes' heads, didn't it? And it's no secret that Queen Camilla has always been a favourite of mine. Always been a favourite of mine. I love an underdog, for one thing, but I also really like her as a person. Well, she was called a dog for many a year, and she was the most reviled woman in the world for many a year, until the people got to know her. The opposite is true of the likes of Meghan and Harry. You know, Meghan was initially adored and given the kind of reception that the King and Queen are receiving out in Australia because of her role, and because she married Harry, not because of her acting chops and talent, not because of her philanthropist great deeds, not because of her beauty, because she married Harry and because she had become a royal. That's it. Until they got to know her. Do you see the difference? Isn't it interesting? And now she's selling pet food. There was a lovely photo of the Duke of Cornwall at the Warren House Inn on Dartmoor during his visit to Cornwall the other day. It's the season approaching for cosy old pubs. We need to make the most of them while they're still here. I still miss the smell of smoke in pubs. It still wafts in from outdoors a little bit, but soon they'll be banning that, so make the most of it, my dear, if you enjoy it like me. The famous fire is said to have been burning since opening in 1845. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, then there must be some hot summers in that pub. But it looks very cosy. It puts me in mind of a memorable pub. Did I tell you about it? I can't remember. It was when I was visiting Winchester a couple of Christmases ago, a couple of Decembers ago. I was staying in Winchester because I was visiting friends, and I was carolling at the cathedral, one of their carol ceremonies. And it was a gorgeous weekend, and I stayed at a pub which has a sort of hotel attached to it, the Wickham Arms, Wickham spelt with a Y, W-Y-K, the Wickham Arms, which I would highly recommend as long as it hasn't changed hands or anything, or had some sort of hideous refurbishment. But it was a twinkling, tipsy evening that we had, with wonderful old school charm and ambience. It's an 18th century inn. Wonderful food, a good night's rest, and a delicious breakfast. The food was wonderful. Actually, we stayed on and had their Sunday roast as well, which was absolutely sublime. And there were some gorgeous dogs in there as well, sniffing around our ankles. Now, I want to return briefly to the subject of Liam Payne, following on from the last broadcast. I've noticed a few discussions on who to blame for the death of Liam Payne. And I've noticed this throughout the media. Everyone seems to be very eager to point the finger of blame for his death. And as I made clear in my broadcast, there are so many contributing factors that nobody denies. His previous mental health struggles, pressure from his job, the record company, I believe things are going on there, gently being dropped from various proceedings, I think. His fame, what you might term the vultures of the hotel staff that had perhaps been supplying him with various substances or characters around the hotel, and the staff, the people at the hotel not attending to his convulsions quickly enough, or calling the medical emergency services. All these things, they're all valid criticisms and points to make. But what I do sense, my dears, is an omission of personal responsibility. He had struggles, for sure, but he was not insane to the best of my knowledge, and all of those who were close to him say that he had been clear-headed for many months and was logical, quick-witted, bright. He knew the risks. This is the point I want to make, which might be controversial, but he knew the risks, just as I knew the risks of smoking from a very early age. That didn't stop me from taking it up at about the age of 13, and I continued to pick up the occasional ciggy, knowing the risks. And if I'm diagnosed with cancer of the throat tomorrow, then I was an active, knowing participant in evoking that destiny. That's the choice I make. That is the risk that I have calculated. And I do reject the notion that fame and riches mark a person out for singularly pressurized situations, because I hear a lot about that, and it's just not true. It's a fallacy. I don't deny for one moment those pressures on those who are famous and rich, whatever, but I refuse to accept that that sort of intense pressure doesn't affect those who have no money and no fame either. No, I don't. And I do think there is a little bit of a tendency for people to insist that it is a sort of singular or particular problem that especially affects the rich and famous. But my point, moreover, is that Liam Payne was not unwitting. He was unlucky, really unlucky. But he made the decision for what we know and what we're told, you understand. I don't know. He could have been physically forced to take some substance which might emerge, but from what we know and what we're told, he accepted it. He made that decision as a 31-year-old father. If it is true that he accepted the offer of drugs and consumed them, then that is a gamble that he took at 31 years of age. He was no longer a boy, he was a 31-year-old man and a father, and he knew the risks. I don't say this as a criticism of him, because I would be a hypocrite to do so. I've taken similar risks and gambles throughout my entire life, and things get passed around at dinner parties. To this day, the most exclusive dinner parties, I can tell you. And do we all know exactly what is in those things that are passed around? No. Or what they're mixed with? No. We take the risks and we take the gamble. And if there are any nasty consequences for that, then I'm not going to blame my host or my peers or the vendor. Absolutely not. It's a matter of personal responsibility. And just as I would be very reluctant to place blame on Mr. Payne's shoulders himself, and that is not what I'm doing, I also think that it is important not to clamour to apportion blame everywhere else but him. Okay, something a little sweeter to finish on, and that is the subject of Catherine Kent, who we rarely get to speak of, don't we? Maida Vale says, perhaps I've missed a broadcast, but I haven't heard you mention that the lovely Duchess of Kent put in a public-ish appearance to celebrate the birthday of His Royal Highness. I always adored her demure regality and have delighted that she had the courage to pursue her own world when the need arose in her feeling of priorities. Her contribution to culture amongst the young, never boasted, never lauded, has been considerable. Yes, well, I did flash up a photograph of her with the Duke of Kent at his birthday, I think. The only photograph I've seen of her recently. But yes, I didn't mention her, and it is worth a mention. Thank you for reminding me, my dear, because she is so rarely seen. She didn't attend the late Queen's funeral. She didn't attend the coronation. She's 91 years of age. Same age as Joan Collins, who I was watching yesterday. And, you know, it is not just the way that she maintains her glamorous look that keeps Joan Collins so young. You know, it's her vivacity, her lucidity, it's her curiosity about life. She's so up to date with everything that's going on here and now, always referencing things in popular culture, keeping curious and informed and up to date, my dear, with so much joie de vivre. That's why she lives such a youthful winter season. Gorgeous. And Catherine Kent is also gorgeous, of course, my dear, but she stepped back from public duties 22 years ago. We have discussed this before, but probably over a year now, my dear, because there's never much cause to bring it up. But she stepped back 22 years ago to devote her time to teaching music, didn't she, at primary school, which she's been doing since the age of 61, and she's known at that primary school, was known as Mrs. Kent, just plain old Mrs. Kent, and it was only the head of that school that actually knew who she was, which is astonishing. She said, only the head knew who I was, the parents didn't know and the pupils didn't know. No one ever noticed. There was no publicity about it at all. Astonishing, especially when you think how famous she was when she married the Duke of Kent, and what a blaze of publicity there was surrounding that. Goes on to be a completely private, anonymous music teacher who was very beloved by her students, I have to say. The antithesis of the Harkles. Sorry, but I have to draw the comparison. The antithesis of their publicity-seeking, aggrandizing nature. They are certainly not the Duke and Duchess of Kent. They are not anything like, and never will be anything like, or anything approaching the Duke and Duchess of Kent. Although perhaps they might be something that's got a little bit of a similar ring to it. The Duke and Duchess of Kent. Until next time, toodle pip.